Magic the Gathering is the greatest game in the world, but it is also one of the most difficult and complex. Just because you know how to play doesn't mean you know how to play well. Just because you know what goes in a deck doesn't mean there isn't more to learn. That's why this video will explore not how to build a Magic the Gathering deck, but how to build a better one. After all, one of the best, most creative parts of Magic the Gathering is building your own deck, combining cards and ideas to express yourself and your passions on the battlefield. However, coming up with the perfect combination of 60 or sometimes even 100 cards can be a daunting, frustrating, and intimidating task. Let's start with, what is your plan? Knowing what your plan is remains one of the most important parts of playing Magic successfully. When building your deck, what are you trying to accomplish? What is your win condition? Sometimes your win condition isn't necessarily to win a game. Sometimes it might be a flavor win, like equipping a Moonsilver Spear to Avacyn, Angel of Hope, or casting Queen Marchesa while the High Throne is out. However you try to win, though, you need to keep in mind not just your destination, but how you're going to get there. Inspiration. First, you need to decide what your inspiration is. How do you like to play Magic? What is it about the game that you enjoy most, and how do you want to express that in your deck design? Maybe you're a fan of a particular card type or combination of cards you love. For example, your deep and abiding love of cats might inspire you to create a cat tribal deck. Or perhaps your deep, sadistic passion for denying resources to your opponents might push you towards a control or discard-focused deck. Maybe you've spotted a fun synergy between several cards and want to see how this interaction can obliterate your opponent's board state. Once you've got a clear image of what you'd like to focus on, let's take a look at your strategy. Strategy. It's important to know not just how you'd like to win, but what you'll need to do to get there. For example, it's not enough to take all the cats in Standard, throw them in a blender with some lands, and see if you get there. You probably won't. You have to actually look at your cards. Did you read the card? Reading the card explains the card, and in so doing, you can understand how they work with one another and how they might win together. Example 1. Cats. Now, for this and all examples in this video, I will not be using the current standard card pool, which is just about to rotate anyways, but rather, I would like to use the previous standard pool. This allows me to draw from a known environment and offer for you what I feel are the best examples. Let's take that oh-so-common idea of, I like cats. I want to make a cats deck. Amonkhet block might as well have been called Amonkhet block, as it had quite a few furry felines to choose from. Examining those cards, we see that they tend to be smaller, cheaper-costed creatures that have some benefits. For example, Sacred Cat is a 1/1 cat creature with lifelink that costs 1 white mana. For the same cost, you can embalm it to create a token with the same stats and ability. Adorned Pouncer is a 1/1 cat as well, for 1 generic and 1 white mana, but it has double strike and the mechanic Eternalize. For 3 generic mana and 2 white, you can create a 4/4 double strike token of Adorned Pouncer if it's in your graveyard. Initiate's Companion, a 3/1 for 1 generic and 1 green, allows you to untap a creature or land if it deals combat damage to a player this turn. Looking at the bigger, more expensive cats, we can see that there are some benefits to sticking with just this creature type in our deck. Regal Caracal is just a 3/3 for 5 mana, but the power it brings to the board is unlike anything else. This Cat Lord immediately pumps all of your cats by +1/+1, gives them lifelink, and also comes with 2 1/1 cat tokens to boot. Meow. Pride Sovereign is also a card that rewards both loyalty to our feline masters and loyalty to having an excess of mana, giving itself +1/+1 for every cat under your control and exerting itself to make even more cats. Together with Initiate's Companion, you can see how this cat-on-cat synergy can help you make even more kitties. Overall, we can see that there's a strategy here that our cat overlords want us to follow. Make lots of cats, buff them up, and swing in for the kill. Given the cost of our creatures, this is likely to be a slightly more aggressive mid-range deck and can build to a crushing, claw-fueled finish if left unchecked. Assemble your team. Alright, you've figured out your overall strategy and how your cards work with each other. Now you need to figure out how to actually assemble your deck and choose the right components to seal your victory. However, there are some easy pitfalls everyone falls into when creating their first few decks, so let's examine them and see how we can best avoid them. Focus on your win condition. Again, everyone has their own win condition, and sometimes that doesn't mean winning the game in a traditional sense. But whatever your win condition is, even if it's a goofy, casual one, be sure that every part of your deck is somehow helping you get to that goal through whatever means possible. Now, I do mean goal in the singular. If you've got a deck brewed up that's trying to win in 2 or 3 different ways, then chances are it's probably not adept at doing any of them. Honing your deck towards a single way to win is going to be the best way you'll achieve it. For example, let's say you've got a red-white constructed deck that is trying to be fast and low to the ground. Your curve has mostly 1 to 4 drops, aggressive pirates and creatures like Fanatic Firebrand and Cavalry Drillmaster. But you're also super excited about Zakama, Primal Calamity, and want to fit her in your deck. Now, Zakama costs 9 mana, 3 of which need to be red, white, and green. Not only are you driving up the average cost of your spells, but you're now split between wanting to be an aggressive deck that wins by turn 4, and splashing that 3rd color in order to cast Zakama late in the game. You'll definitely want at least a few mana sources of green in order to play her, but that might interfere with your plan of casting cheap creatures and attacking every turn in the early game, since the mana sources you'll include for Zakama might muddy up the mana base of an aggressive deck, especially if you're playing tap lands like Scattered Groves and Sheltered Thicket. This is where you'll need to choose. Do you want to stay aggro or retool your deck to stave off damage while ramping up to Zakama quickly? Remember, there isn't a wrong answer in this situation. Both of these strategies are good ways to win a game of Magic, but they aren't going to be found in the same deck. Keep in mind, you can always make more decks to accommodate the many win conditions you like. You don't have to play just one deck. Don't get married to your cards. Sometimes when we build a deck, we get really excited about a few cards that we think are amazing without acknowledging that perhaps they aren't the best fit. Maybe there's a combo that, in the unlikely event it does go off, could completely devastate your opponent. Or you think that adding this card will be the ultimate flavor win. Or maybe you think it would be a good fit to your deck strategy and you want every card out there you can legally put in your deck that could help. In every situation where you're putting together a collection of things, whether it's a menu, a deck of cards, or a superhero team, you're going to have to make some cuts. Sorry, Hawkeye. Maybe this card just isn't going to help you win because it's not gelling super well with your other cards. What it wants to do is something else entirely. Or maybe it just isn't as efficient at doing what it's supposed to do as another card might be. Why play a murder after all if a fatal push can be just as effective and cheaper? Or why bother with a fiery intervention when you just need quick damage like a lightning bolt? Again, you need to keep your win condition, your game plan, in mind at all times. The cards that will get you there the best and most efficiently are the ones you should keep. It's okay to leave others behind. You can always find a home for them in another deck. Don't be a slave to your theme. Sometimes we get carried away with our inspirations, and when you're caught up in a frenzy of wanting all the cats, all the merfolk, and every card must have Rebecca Gay art, you can lose something important along the way. Namely, the ability to win the game. Let's take a look at that deck we mentioned earlier. Now, ideally, every single creature card in your deck should be a cat, or at least feature a cat in the art somewhere, right? Wrong. If you want to see your felines ferociously finish your foes, you'll need to be prepared to make some concessions. Let's look at Watchers of the Dead versus Metallic Mimic, for example. Watchers of the Dead is a 2/2 for 2 generic mana and is a cat. Bonus points already. Its text reads, exile Watchers of the Dead. Each opponent chooses 2 cards in his or her graveyard and exiles the rest. Now, even though Watchers of the Dead is a fairly costed 2/2 cat with upsides, we need to take a look at what it wants to do as a card. Their ability is a great way to hose your opponent's graveyard, but it doesn't quite align with what our cat deck wants to do, which is make a lot of cats, buff them up, and overwhelm our opponent. So it's a cat, yes, but it isn't doing what the deck wants to do with cats. Perhaps this isn't the best card for our deck after all. On the other hand, let's look at Metallic Mimic. For 2 generic mana, you get a 2/1 artifact creature Shapeshifter, whose text reads, as Metallic Mimic enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Metallic Mimic is the chosen type in addition to its other types. Each other creature you control of the chosen type enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Even though Metallic Mimic isn't a cat in and of itself, you can make it a cat and give all of your subsequent cats that additional +1/+1 buff. This absolutely supports your cat deck's theme and winning strategy much better than Watchers of the Dead, and the impact it makes on the rest of your deck is far-reaching in comparison. Consistency. Another one of the most important factors to be mindful of when building a winning deck is consistency. If you want your strategy to be implemented every time you play your deck, you need to be sure to draw the cards you want consistently, which is one of the reasons why most decks play 60 cards. But how to make sure you put the right amount of cards in each time? In constructed formats like Modern, Standard, Legacy, and Vintage, you are only permitted to put up to 4 copies of a card into your deck, with the exception, of course, of basic lands. But do you always just run 4 of each card? No. How do you know, though, which cards to run 3 of, or even just 1 of? Let's cover these numbers and why you'd want a certain number of them in your deck. Let's start with which cards you'd run 4 copies of. You definitely want to put 4 copies of a card into your deck if you always want to draw that card every time, and you're happy to see it even if it's in your opening hand. It's a card that's a key part of your strategy, and you'll want to have it in hand to cast in order to win the game, or at least put a ton of pressure on the board. For example, looking back into that previous standard, many mono-red aggro decks usually played 4 Bomat Couriers and 4 Earthshaker Kenras. These cheaper creatures all have haste and could get in damage immediately, but also have upsides. Bomat Courier can refill or reset your hand later in the game, when you can discard your hand and pick up the ones it's exiled earlier in the game. Earthshaker Kenra's enter the battlefield effect makes it so that creatures with less than or equal to its power cannot block this turn. This is something that's great in the early game when you can get in extra points of damage, but its Eternalize ability allows it to come back in the later game as a 4/4, re-triggering its enter the battlefield effect. This can be devastating for your opponent by increasing your chances of getting in a free attack with your creatures, ending the game decisively and quickly. These cards are directly tied to the deck's fast, low to the ground, and offensive strategy, and are key to its success. Cards like this are invaluable to your deck, and you'll want to run the maximum number of them in every brew you make, hence 4 copies each. So why would you only run 3 copies of a card? You'd want to add 3 copies of a card to your deck if you want to draw it at least once a game. These are often legendary creatures, significant pieces of removal, or planeswalkers, cards that you'll be happy to see but aren't too keen on having around all of the time. Let's look at the blue-white control deck that won the 25th Anniversary Pro Tour.
He's got Illumination, and he can cycle Cast Out to exile all the lands that Martin Yuza has on the battlefield.
This deck played 3 copies of Settle the Wreckage, which is an instant that costs 2 generic mana and 2 white. The card reads, exile all attacking creatures target player controls. That player may search their library for that many basic land cards, put those cards onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle their library. Obviously, this is a powerful card with incredible upsides for you, clearing the board of any threats so that you can keep your strategy on track. However, you may not always want to use this card more than once per game. Maybe every now and then twice a game, but those exceptions would be rare. After all, there are board states that it's not worth using that card on, or where you need more targeted, unconditional removal. 3 copies of a card is always a good medium place to be for cards that help your strategy along, but aren't the most vital to your win condition. So when do you only want to run 2 copies of a card? 2 copies of a card in your deck usually indicates that this is a card you'd like to see reliably, maybe once a game, but isn't something you'd like to draw very often. For example, in an Approach of the Second Sun deck, you usually only play 2 copies. After all, once you've cast the first one, you don't really need the second copy. If we look at our mono-red aggro deck again, they tend to play 2 copies of Glorybringer. While Glorybringer is an excellent card that has a huge impact on the game, its higher cost of 5 mana is a bit high for a low-to-the-ground aggro deck. So why do decks sometimes run just 1 copy of a card? There's usually only 1 copy of a card in your deck if you don't want to draw it often, but you'll be able to find it if you need it. For example, let's assume that you're splashing for black and you only need 1 swamp in order to cast this one very beneficial spell. Now, you may not draw that 1 swamp very often, but perhaps you'll have 2 Evolving Wilds or another mana tutor like Pilgrim's Eye in order to help you find it. Likewise, let's assume you'd like to play Geshath, Sun's Avatar. It's a huge, expensive creature, so you'll only want to play 1 of them in your deck, but you'll also have a couple of creature tutors, like Forerunner of the Empire, to help you find it when you need it. In general, you'll only want 1 of a card if its use is really very narrow, but it still benefits your deck overall. Sideboards. Most constructed formats allow you to have a sideboard of 15 cards, and of course it can be tempting to dump all the cards that you've cut while designing your deck right into the sideboard. However, a sideboard is at its best when it can complement and help patch up the weaknesses your deck might have. It should contain answers to threats your deck might face and help keep your strategy afloat. For example, a red-black aggro deck that might face itself in a mirror match would usually run 3 Chandra's Defeats in the sideboard to address those issues. It gives the deck an answer to threats like Glorybringer, Hazoret, or a Chandra Torch of Defiance. Likewise, 3 copies of Duress can also help the deck preempt any counterspells or removal that a control player might have. Your sideboard must be as strategic as your main deck in its build and approach, and don't be afraid to apply the same tactics of being open-minded and card agnostic when needed. Playtesting. I did an entire video on the importance of playtesting, and it was actually one of my least viewed videos ever. Nonetheless, I still maintain that one of the most important and key steps in creating a resilient, winning deck is to test it against others. Go out and find a play group of other folks in your format and see how your deck does. But most importantly, be honest with yourself about your deck's strengths and weaknesses. Decks constantly shift and evolve over time, so don't be afraid to take out the cards you think aren't doing well and add something you think will make it stronger. Again, don't get attached too much to a card if it's holding you back from achieving your victory. Put it aside and find something better. Alright, let's talk about the mana base. Your mana base is going to be important in determining the success of your deck. For a more thorough breakdown on mana bases, you can check out my Tolarian tutor videos here and here, which cover things like mana curve and mana bases, but here are some general guidelines based on archetypes, assuming a 60-card deck. Again, these numbers are just a guideline. Check those links out for a much more thorough breakdown. Aggro decks are typically going to want to run 18 to 22 lands. Mid-range decks are typically going to want to run 23 to 25 lands. Control decks are typically going to want to run 26 to 29 lands. Combo decks, however, can be all over the place. For example, Seismic Swans tends to play 35 lands, but a Combo Elves deck may only need 12. If you're playing around with Combo in addition to those Tolarian tutors on mana bases, you probably should check out, my Tolarian tutor on Combo. I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. My professional consultant today has been my own tutor, Emma Handy. Michelle Rapp served as our script supervisor, and Patrick Lickman was our editor. If you'd like more intermediate lessons like this one, of course check out my extensive Tolarian tutor series, which covers so many more lessons for the world of Magic the Gathering. But always remember, it's not about winning individual games of Magic. It's about getting better, win or lose.